Well, good evening, Little Masters, and welcome to episode 262 of the Prancing Pony podcast, where, to quote Rush, no changes are permanent, but change is. And as Sean Marchese rides off into the horizon for now, I want to welcome the only other person to have ever actually co-hosted an episode of the Prancing Pony podcast before, and a man for whom I have no clever nickname because, he's already got one, you see. Folks, let me introduce you to the Tolkien Professor, Corey Olsen.
Oh, yes, it's very nice.
Yes, it is.
Folks, go ahead and pull up a bench in the common room. As the man said, I'm Corey Olsen, the Tolkien Professor, and I'm here with the man of the West, who's prepared to take your castle by force, Alan Sisto.
Thank you, Corey. Must be time to fetch a lavash. All right, folks. Well, tonight, on top of welcoming a new co-host to the Prancing Pony, we are welcoming a few of our patrons to join us for, believe it or not, our 20th quarterly Questions After Nightfall.
But for those of you joining us for the first time, welcome. Here at the Prancing Pony podcast, I'm joining Alan as we read and talk our way through Tolkien's stories of Middle-earth, a few pages at a time.
Usually. But once a quarter, we take a break from our read-through and welcome a few of our patrons to join us here in the common room and bring along some of their very best questions.
Now, we have no idea what they're going to ask us. So, as Alan and Sean have done 19 times before, we're going to be answering their questions as best we can with the resources available in our recording nooks.
Or in your massive brain. As with previous Questions After Nightfall episodes, aside from any possible edits for nervous coughs or time spent flipping through pages as we hurriedly look for an answer, we will be presenting this as it was recorded live. All the answers you hear in the show will have been recorded during this session.
Now, if you'd like to get in on the next one, go check out the Prancing Pony podcast Patreon page at patreon.com/prancingponypod. Questions After Nightfall episodes are recorded every quarter, and patrons at the Elrond's honorarium tier and higher are invited to join.
That's right. It's just one of the many ways we say thanks to our patrons, giving them the opportunity to join us on the show, make us laugh, make us think, and, well, more often than not, totally embarrass us in the best possible way. Let's go ahead and get started tonight. Corey, who's up first?
Okay, first we have Rob from Houston.
All right, Rob, welcome.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
It's great to have you.
So my question involves the three hunters in the two towers. We hear that Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas run 45 leagues in 4 days, and that works out to be 135 miles or 5.15 marathons. It's a long way to run.
It's a very long way to run.
One of the weird things that happened during COVID is I couldn't go to the gym, so I started becoming a runner. So I'm not going to say I'm going to go out and run that distance, but I do have a feeling for it that I didn't have.
It's a little more real to you now? Yeah.
That's quite something, yeah.
But when I looked into this a little bit, ultramarathons, which is anything over 26 miles,
right,
are kind of a new thing. They really started in the 70s and the 80s, which is well after Tolkien wrote The Lord of the Rings. So I was wondering if there's anything in his letters or in his biography or some of the things, that you guys probably have at your fingertips that would indicate why he would come up with that distance, because he's kind of spot on. Humans can easily do that.
They can. That's true. Well, easily might be the wrong word.
I was going to say, right?
To a couple of humans who couldn't easily do it.
It seems ambitious. Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, properly trained. I would imagine maybe his experience in the military showed him that people who are fit are capable of pretty incredible physical tasks. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, Corey, in the letters that would give us any explanation directly.
No, not specifically related to, running or distance running, but I agree. His military experience, he would have done a great deal of marching and seen others march, for quite long distances. So I think that would have probably given him a pretty good sort of benchmark, given that, an infantryman can march, this long in a day, then it would be an extraordinary, but probably achievable feat, for them to have run this far. One of the things that I think about, Rob, Éomer's response to this feat, right? Wingfoot, I name you, right? He says, which is interesting because it sounds like, he's commenting on the speed, right? And surely to have crossed that distance in that short a number of days, obviously they're moving fast in the big picture, right? It's an endurance feat more than a speed feat, really, that it is. It always sort of, I always kind of felt like Éomer was burying the lead there.
He kind of was. I mean, he ends it, right? He says, hardy is the race of Elendil. Of course, I might also add, hardy is the race of Túrin in that particular case as well. But yeah, he does sort of bury the lead. You're right. It's not just speed. It's the fact that for, this incredible period of time, into the fourth day, right? Ere the fourth day is ended, they've covered
Yes.
this incredible distance.
Exactly.
And yeah, there are events that are similarly lengthy. I actually know an acquaintance of mine who is an ultramarathoner, and I see him every once in a while working out at the gym. I think his body fat is measured in the tenths of a percentage point. He is an incredible athlete, but he has done things like the Badwater Ultramarathon, which is the one that starts in Badwater Basin in Death Valley and works itself all the way up to the very top of Whitney Portal, which is the trailhead to Mount Whitney, 8,300 feet above sea level, and it's 135 miles long. It is brutal, but the fact that humans can do that, I suppose Aragorn and Legolas, I'm a little surprised that Gimli could do it, but we know they're even hardier than men, right? Aule made them extremely capable of endurance.
Right, which always makes me slightly chafe at, the joke about dwarves being natural sprinters, which is obviously the opposite of the truth, right?
It's very much the opposite of the truth.
But anyway, yeah, agreed. I would say that I don't think he's starting from what do I think is human capability, and then and I'll say that they did that. I think he probably checked it the other way around. I think he started with his maps, right? Because he was very careful in thinking to scale and made measurements on his maps and things to try to get proportions. I mean, he tried to do the maps to some extent to scale, though obviously hard to be very precise at that kind of scale. But anyway, I mean, he was thinking about things with that kind of detail. So I bet you he starts off just by measuring. Right. Okay. How far will this be? And probably, I believe from there, he would then say, okay, so how many days do I think I can say they covered that distance in?
And do I need them to cover it in 4 days? I mean, maybe I'd want them to cover it in 5 because that seems a little more realistic, but I need them to be there in 4 days because of the timeline.
Oh, my goodness. And he was monkeying with the timeline a day here, a day there, all over the place.
Time. Yeah.
Trying to keep all the timelines in sync was really, really challenging. But so, I think that those are the things that he's kind of weighing. And at the end of the day, I do think that he wanted it to clearly be something that was going to be impressive, but not
superhuman,
ridiculously beyond.
Exactly. Yeah. Not like an elf swimming from Valinor to Middle Earth. I'm just saying.
Right.
Just as an example.
For instance. Yeah. If that were to happen, which would be absurd.
Would be crazy. Right.
Yeah. Nobody would do that.
No, of course not. That was a really interesting question, Rob. I liked it quite a bit.
Okay. Next, we've got Jerome.
Jerome, welcome to Questions After Nightfall, sir.
Thank you, Corey. Thank you for taking my question, Corey, as well. My question's about, I guess, something from the first age with Glaurung and the situation between Nienor and Túrin. This just kind of popped out to me when I was reading through the Narn, I believe it's called, from Book of Lost Tales. I forgot the exact name of it, but just how he compared that situation and what Túrin and Nienor ended up creating, compared to like just his descriptions of like the Nirnaeth and all the other large battles. And it just seemed, to me, it seemed out of balance. Now, I'm not sure if that means it's actually not severe and insevere, whatever, but it did kind of come at me almost like it came from a Christian perspective, which obviously with Tolkien's background makes sense. But I wonder then, to me, that didn't seem to be like, quote unquote, of like Middle Earth. It was more of a outside injection into into that whole universe as opposed to.
You're talking specifically about Túrin and Nienor, getting married.
Is it Glaurung's action that you're thinking about, or specifically like how Nienor and Túrin were behaving?
Just specifically how it was written about being implied, as almost it was more severe than the whole of the Nirnaeth Arnoyad and all those deaths. From the Christian perspective, that's a really severe deal. Probably echoed from his Catholic belief, of course. So it seems like it's more severe in that regard. That'd be more egregious of one of his acts.
You're talking about how the what would eventually become an ancestral relationship between Túrin and his sister unknowingly, how that is called out specifically by Tolkien in a way that is clearly and rightly critical.
Right, but it seems to be, and I thought, to me at least, it seemed like it came from his Christian viewpoint. Just wondering if does that make any type of problem or concern for people who don't have a Christian viewpoint and their immersion into that story or that novel or the legendarium itself?
Okay.
So does that create any type of problem?
That's a fair question. I suppose it's, I think just about every culture imaginable would have a stigma, rightly, on sexual relationships between siblings. I think that's. Do I dare say that's universal? I think I can say that safely. I don't think there are any cultures in which that's an accepted thing. You might get second cousins. Maybe there are some royal lines with first cousins, but I think I'm standing on fairly solid ground when I say that's not something that cultures, regardless of religion, would have tolerated, at least not in semi-modern times, maybe in ancient times.
Yeah, well, and actually, not even there. I mean, of course, there are some examples. Laurie is pointing out Egyptian royal lines, for instance, and there certainly are. There's that kind of situation. However, there's actually kind of irony here, Jerome, in that although I do, I mean, obviously, I certainly his own Catholic beliefs would certainly, support the disapproval of incest. However,
Yes, it would.
He actually is getting this from a pagan source. This is not from a Christian source at all. In fact, there's actually some irony here because the story of Túrin and Nienor, especially, I would add, their suicides, which frankly, from a Catholic perspective, is a bigger problem than the incest in some ways. Like incest, you can be forgiven for. Suicide's tricky.
Yeah.
From a Catholic doctrinal perspective, I mean.
Right.
So the ending of the story with a double suicide is actually kind of a stumbling block from a Catholic perspective, or certainly emphasizes a rather extreme level of tragedy for the story. But this story, of course, is taken, this is a long-standing Tolkien fan fiction that he wrote from the Kalevala. I mean, like
Kullervo, right?
One of the very first things he wrote, exactly, was the story of Kullervo, which was his absolutely pure fan fiction version of the Kullervo story from the Kalevala, which included a dog, which was also fun. There's a fun dog. It's like the second best dog in, Rover Random counts.
Okay,
too, third best dog in Tolkien's fiction is the dog in Kullervo. Anyway, point is that the primary shape of the story of, Kullervo being this, the great hero, and then sort of a curse upon him, and the incest and the suicide, that's all there in the Kalevala. So he's actually bringing that in. In some ways, the more remarkable choice that he made was not changing that, like not editing that. It's all of the starkness and even sort of the horror involved. I know I won't soften that. Absolutely.
No, I don't think you can.
The horror involved.
What Nienor realizes when Glaurung drops the spell is, I mean, I cannot even conceive of the horror, great word, that she would feel at that. The revulsion, the absolute
creepiest thing Glaurung ever said was talking about how, the worst of his acts you shall feel within yourself. Oh my goodness.
Man. I give thee joy that thou hast found thy brother at last.
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh. So disturbing on every level.
And then, of course, at the same time, her response to that, right? Her response to Túrin, farewell, O twice beloved.
Yes.
That, like the grace, the forgiveness, but so tragic and so painful in that moment, that she doesn't, I mean, she could respond. Glaurung wants her to respond not only with self-loathing, but with loathing of him, right? That's sort of the last seed that Glaurung is trying to sow, and so her refusal to hate him despite in that moment of horror and oh man, it's like that line by Nienor gets me every time.
It does.
Yeah. But anyway, all that stuff. So clearly this is a really powerful story. And Tolkien obviously himself thought it was a really powerful story. I mean, he told this story again and again and again, right? I mean, he wrote like
multiple versions.
Multiple. He wrote Kullervo, then he wrote the version in the Book of Lost Tales. Then he's like, I want to do an epic poem on this.
Yes, I was hoping you were going to bring that in, because that is
twice. I'm going to write two versions of it, right? And then though he didn't get to the incest either time, but still, he was working up to it, right? And then he's going to rewrite it again for the the later Quenta, and then he's going to rewrite it, in the longer version that he wrote in the 50s, with the extra bits of which get into unfinished tales. So, there was obviously something that Tolkien loved about this story, and he obviously didn't love it, like, despite this element,
right?
Even because he kept it in. He could have changed it. He had lots of opportunities,
especially the suicide part, because you're right, that is such a more troublesome and problematic issue from a Catholic perspective, that if he wanted to change that, he could have. He could have made it to where Nienor killed Túrin, or maybe, Túrin killed her and then Brandir killed Túrin for killing her, and then that way there's no suicide. It would have been a relatively simple task. He chose not to do that and keep that story intact the way he took it from Kullervo.
Yeah.
For a reason. Now, it's hard to determine and discern what that reason is, but he clearly was moved by this tale.
The raw power of the story is sort of sufficiently clear, I think, that we
think so.
Now, I don't want to, we can't ever get into Tolkien's head and say, I know exactly why he thought this, because we don't. But yeah, I mean, Jerome, I agree. I think he does consider the suicide kind of part in that way, that it would lose some of the sheer tragedy of it. I mean, in my mind, the story of Túrin Turambar, which I always find very painful, I can't reread it very often, because it's hard.
It is really hard. It makes me cry every time. And you just keep hoping Túrin will make different decisions too earlier on. You just keep thinking, okay, not this time. Túrin's not going to make that mistake again.
Yeah. But then, in the end, I think about the story of Túrin, like the story of, the story of the children of Húrin, as really one of the sort of purest encapsulations of like the horror of life. I mean, there's no story that just like more squarely looks in the face. The world is often horrible and life sucks, right?
And it can get this bad.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, if there's a story that is about mortality and like all the horrors of mortality, it's that story.
It really is. If there's one thing that I say because of course the whole story is richly powerful. It is wonderful. But if there's a thing I like about it, it's how it's framed. And you kind of just mentioned this as the title, The Children of Húrin. Because when you come back to it from that perspective and you look at the fact that Húrin had to endure all of this while sitting on a chair chained there by Morgoth and watching this thing happen, and yet his defiance of Morgoth held. I love that. That scene when Húrin is first taken there and Morgoth's I'm going to do all these terrible things. Like, I don't care because we get to leave Arda and screw you, man. And, I absolutely adore Húrin's strength, tenacity, determination. And then, of course, you're just brokenhearted at the end, when he does end up running into Morwen at the end. That moment, I can't even think about that moment without tears.
Absolutely. His non-answer when she asks what happens to the children, right? Oh, man. Yeah. No, it is. But you're right. I mean, the Húrin frame, his defiance first and, cursing by Morgoth, and then the meeting with Morwen at the end, right? Seeing the story within that frame. It's like just when you thought this story couldn't get more tragic, right? Couldn't get more horrible. Oh man. Yeah. No, but this was something that Tolkien, he was obviously interested in this. And that sounds like a dumb thing to say, but like, obviously he was interested. He wrote the story seven times. Of course he was interested in it. But no, I just mean, clearly this mattered. There was something that this story was getting at that mattered to him. And I do think in this way, the incest and suicide, he's not going to look away from that, right? No. I mean, just as Húrin himself, right, is sitting there in the chair, forcibly compelled to look and not to look away.
Right.
That sort of, we have that same experience.
Exactly. Right? We are forced. We are now
forced
compelled
to look at it and can't look. And so he, as an author, he's not going to look away, even from the most horrible things like the incest and the suicide, right? He's going to give us a story which gets like almost as bad as it can possibly get.
Just about. And,
make us really, so that we can really confront, what, like the actual suffering of what's at stake here, in this world that, Morgoth is dominating. It's a big deal.
It's a huge deal. And it's one of those things that I think, when I come back to one of the themes that we've always talked about on the show, this concept of spabimi, right, as we've shortened it, shall prove it mine instrument, this idea that evil can still be turned to good, or as Mandos would say, and yet remain evil.
Right.
This is the hardest test of that concept by far, because there's no way to spin this as anything but incredibly dark, incredibly tragic, evil in the sense of what Glaurung has caused. And yet you have to still trace the threads down and see the good that does come from it. Because it's certainly not there, right? It's not in those moments. Túrin doesn't get to experience the good. Nienor doesn't get to experience the good. Arguably, even Húrin doesn't get to experience the good. But there are good things that come from it. And I think that may be another element that Tolkien was wanting us to see through that even in these darkest moments. Yeah.
Exactly. And the story itself is one of the goods that comes from it.
Yeah,
right? That
absolutely.
we can see these things, that we should be confronted with this and even just the compassion, right? As much as it breaks our hearts, to a certain extent, it's sort of good that it should break our hearts.
Exactly. The fact that our hearts can be broken is itself a good thing. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
That's a very good point. Chad, you've got a question. You got your hand raised for a follow-up.
I was just going to say that there at the end, as far as the winning, the victory part of it, Morwen, since she didn't know, the only thing she saw was the tombstone saying that he had killed Glaurung. She didn't know about the incest. And so when Hurin says she wasn't conquered, he meant mentally as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. You're right. In a way, certainly Morwen came through without having to, endure the darkness that Túrin, Nienor, and Hurin all had to endure. I mean, she had her own hardships, of course, but just not to the same degree.
That's actually something I feel like I've never understood. There's still lots of things in Tolkien. Right? Did you come? I don't know. I don't know how often you have this experience where you read something in Tolkien and you're like, maybe someday I'll be wise enough to understand this, but I don't think today is the day yet. Right?
There may come a day, but it is not this day. There may come a day,
yeah. But someday. But honestly, I've often felt that way about that line.
The "she was not conquered" line? Yeah.
Yeah, what Hurin meant when he said she is not conquered. I mean, clearly he does sort of preserve her innocence of the whole full horror of the story, right? Yeah, she doesn't, he can see, by her question, he can tell she doesn't know what happened. And he pointedly doesn't tell her until, and then she dies, right?
Yeah.
So clearly he's made that choice not to tell her. And yet I can't think that all that he means is that it's not only through ignorance makes it sound really harsh, but it's not just through ignorance of the story that she has conquered, right? That's like his epitaph on her, right?
Yes.
He doesn't write it on the stone, but there's this, the sort of the parallel, but because the stone is right there, Chad, as you're reminding us of what's written on the stone, right? She was not conquered, just as Túrin didn't lose to Glaurung in the end, right? He beat Glaurung. So she has conquered. Morwen has conquered as well. But exactly what she has conquered and in exactly what sense, someday I'll figure that out, but I still don't know it.
I think the key might be in the sentence right before. I'm looking at the text right now and we read, after Hurin knew that she had died, he looked down at her in the twilight and it seemed to him that the lines of grief and cruel hardship were smoothed away. She was not conquered, he said. Mm-hmm. And he closed her eyes and sat unmoving beside her as the night drew on. It makes me maybe come back to the things that he had to say to Morgoth about no matter what you do to us, we'll be able to leave this place of horror. We'll be able to leave the circles of the world and go to some place, right, where the elves know not. We'll be able to go to some place where the pain of this is going to be gone. And so even if we are conquered, it's a temporary.
Yeah.
Death itself is the freeing from even a temporary conquering.
Right.
I know I'm kind of grasping at straws a little bit, but I feel like that may be part of it, at least, a portion of it.
Yeah.
Great question. Wow. Jerome, thank you. We don't get to talk about Túrin very often, and probably because it is so dark that it is honestly hard to talk about.
Yeah.
Those 3 episodes that Sean and I did 5 years ago are still the ones that carry some of the most weight in my mind because they were so emotional, even when we tried to be lighthearted about it, because how can you be lighthearted about some of this stuff?
Hard to make too many jokes in certain portions of that story.
Yeah. I mean, I can tell you there were some things that didn't even make the cutting room floor, but
I'm sure.
Yeah, it was really hard because you sort of, when you're spending that much time in the story, and I say that much time, and I'm here with Corey, who would take 10 years to cover the Children of Hurin.
3 sessions?
Yeah, exactly. It was before we knew what we were doing. And it was, in fairness, 3 2-hour sessions. So it was 6.5 total hours. But yeah, we could have done that easily as 12 episodes, and I wish we had. Mm-hmm. It's one of those things where you had to find joy here and there and find ways to sort of remind yourself, okay, it's just a story. This is just fiction. But like you said before, the fact that our hearts can be broken by this and that we can have that compassion and empathy for fictional characters reminds us that we can have that sort of compassion for folks who are enduring incredibly difficult and painful circumstances in the real world.
Right.
And, obviously that is a good, like you said, the goods that come out of this story. Yeah.
Right.
Excellent.
Well,
Jerome, thank you for that one. Corey, who do we have up next?
All right. Next is Lewis from South Carolina.
All right, Lewis, welcome, sir.
Thank you. Well, because this is my first time here and because we have a new co-host, I have an icebreaker question for you.
Great.
Okay.
I want to know what's going on inside your heads.
Well, that's a very broad
Are you
question.
sure?
Yeah, exactly. You may want to rephrase that.
Well, here's the context. When we read a book, we use the author's words in our imagination to create images in our head of the scenes that are described. When we watch a movie or see other artwork based on it, we're experiencing someone else's interpretation of the text, which can sometimes be very different from our own. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it can be so powerful it might replace our own image of it.
That's definitely true.
For instance, whatever my original image was of the hobbits hiding from the Black Rider in the Shire, it's been completely replaced by John Howell's image of that.
Oh, yes.
Conversely, when I think of Rivendell, the image in my mind is still the one that I, interpret from the text, rather than the wonderful imagery of Jackson's.
Okay.
So, finally getting to my question. When you read or think about the stories of the Legendarium, is the imagery that you see in your mind your original reading version of the scene? Or is it Jackson's or Howell's or another's or a combination?
Oh my.
Do you have examples that you can share with us of what you're seeing for various texts that you read of Tolkien nowadays?
Excellent question, Lewis. This is going to be a fun one.
Yeah.
Definitely a mix. I mean, I'll just answer my part of that right off. It is absolutely a mix. I still have some of my original concepts in my mind, especially of Minas Tirith, believe it or not. As many times as I've seen the Jackson films in particular, I still have an image in my mind of a city that I created in my head when I first encountered it many, many, many years ago. But a lot of it has been replaced by art from Alan Lee and John Howe and Ted Naismith. And more recently, especially First Age, the art of Yenny Dolphin has completely changed the way I envision some of the elves. Goodness, I could go on. But Corey, you jump in and take over a little bit.
Yeah. So when I'm reading, which first of all, I do almost entirely in audio form. Yes. I'm a very audio oriented person. So I actually, in some ways, the voices matter to me a great deal more. Like, I'm less likely to have a picture of Frodo in my head, a visual picture of Frodo in my head that looks like Elijah Wood, than I am to have a picture, like an audio picture of Frodo in my head that sounds like, some of my favorite audio performances. So I've been very formed by a lot of the audiobooks that I have read, and I've read, many of them over the years. So yeah, for me, that's really one of the primary things. I mean, honestly, this is one of the things that has, because of this, that has really helped. One of the reasons I can often identify passages quoted from the text or come up with direct quotations is that I can usually hear the voice in my head because I listened to it so many times.
Oftentimes, I'm going to guess from the BBC adaptation. Those are a lot of the ones I call back to.
Yeah, those I love. But yeah, no, I mean, and of course the unabridged audiobook, not the new one. So for me, those have been very, very influential for me. But I certainly, I do have mental pictures as well. And there are some that I have found, I certainly have had the same experience that so many had, like when first seeing the Peter Jackson films, for instance, as first seeing, the other films as well. I mean, there's a reason I think that the Rankin-Bass Hobbit visually is really weird, because I'm like, that's just not what the Elven King looks like. I'm sorry.
But I still sometimes see him in that.
Yeah.
Because that was my first exposure to Tolkien. Yeah. My second, because it was the book. But it was the book based on the animated films. So it was all the stills from that. So then, of course, I watched the TV special. And so those kind of got stuck in my head for a while. But fortunately, most of those are gone, as are my original images of the shorts-wearing Aragorn from the Bakshi film. I'm so glad that has been erased, and I no longer consider Aragorn to be walking around in 1970s shorts.
Yes.
I'm so grateful for that mind bleach.
That is just as well. And I mean, I was I remember very clearly sitting in the theater watching The Fellowship of the Ring for the first time, and the number of places that I was just like, that is perfect. It's
Yes.
just exactly like what I always thought.
Some of the flyovers of the Shire, especially, were just
Yeah, exactly. It was mostly like the big landscapes, not even so much the buildings and such, but like, I mean, for whatever reason, I remember it was like that flyover shot of Eregion that really sticks in my head as one of those moments when I was just like, yeah, it's perfect, right? I mean, there were lots of places that, you know, were really important and which I thought they did very well in. Minas Tirith, you mentioned. I think their Minas Tirith is lovely. It's not quite exactly right.
No, it's missing the black wall.
The black walls is the main thing. Yeah, exactly. Not to mention walls that like actually can stand up to somebody throwing a rock at them. But
well, there is that too. Yeah.
This is another really interesting thing that I find about visual imagery, and another sort of sign that I don't really primarily rely on visualization, I think, in my own head. And I think here of the winged helmets, right? The winged helmet issue.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of questions like, what does that look like? Tolkien himself was like he described it, but then like he did some sketches, but most of them are not very satisfying. In fact, like the majority of winged helmets look kind of dumb. Like it's a hard thing to do really well. Like
they look really impractical too.
Very often. And so my own experience when I have looked at like visualizations of the winged helmets, I don't think I've ever seen one that I'm like, oh yeah, that's exactly right. No, every single one of them looks dorky, but they're not dorky in my head. And if somebody asked me, well, then what do your non-dorky helmets look like then? I would be like,
I can't draw
I don't know.
I'm not an artist.
No, but it's, for me, it's, I'm not even picturing them. I couldn't even describe them. I'm hearing it in my head and I've got the concept, right? So I've combined like swan wing and helmet. And so swan wing helmet exists in my brain, but I don't picture it. I don't look at it. And anytime I'm forced to visualize it, I'm like, ooh, funny looking swan wing helmet. It's not for me, right?
Oh, that is great.
So yeah, I do think there are a lot of things that are for me non-visual. And it's definitely another reason why I was really focused on people's voices.
Well, and that makes sense too, if you're coming at it from the world of audiobooks. When you said, you know, you do it with audio, I was thinking in my head the way I read the books, which is aloud.
Right.
Because I do still listen to the audiobooks, but my experience has been primarily reading the books aloud. So it's not so much that I'm hearing the voices because they all sound like me. I don't know how that happens.
Right.
But it's like the musicality of Tolkien's language that certainly you'd never really get in a visual format. You can't have a film dialogue, maybe sometimes, but I'm thinking specifically about the narrative that is sometimes often flows in a way that no film is going to be able to transfer, you know, into a visual format.
And this is something I've been thinking about a lot as we've been anticipating the Rings of Power show coming out. And as it's just now when we're recording this, 2 episodes have been released. And a lot of the reactions that people have or anxieties that people have. And so as I've been thinking about a lot of those things, I keep coming back to this whole question of what is the book? Because one thing I've noticed that there are a lot of people who see a visual image and they say, that's not Tolkien, when what they actually mean is that's not the picture that's in my head.
Right.
From when I've read Tolkien, right? That picture of Tolkien is different from mine. And again, I know that's not what everybody means when they say that about everything, but often I'm thinking about, for instance, people who flip out about the length of elf hair, for instance, right? Like that, I get it. It's not your picture. It doesn't fit with your picture, and that's fine. Like, and there's nothing wrong with that. And that kind of dealing with that is,
you're entitled to have your own imagination. Welcome to it. Absolutely.
And it's always a struggle when you see an adaptation. It's always jarring to have your own imagination of things, you know, to confront, somebody else's vision of it. That's always hard. And there's nothing shameful in that. However, it's gotten me thinking about a lot of these things. And the thing that I realized, and this came out when Maggie and I on our Other Minds and Hands show did our interview with John Howe, and we were talking with John Howe about some of these things. And the thing that kind of emerged from that was how the relationship between an artist and what the artist is doing, right? When the artist is trying to capture something, both, you know, John Howe was talking about his artistic process, which was, as I discussed with him, reminding me very much of Tolkien's description of his artistic process, where both of them talk about not inventing something, right? It's not that like the origin of the thing is in their own heads and they're trying to get it out on paper. Both of them describe this experience of discovering something. Right.
Exactly.
Like there's something out there and they're just trying to sort of get to it.
Yeah. Their job is just to uncover it. Right.
Exactly. Which any artist would say, and I think both John Howe and Tolkien would say and did say, they don't do that perfectly, right? I mean, that's not, like on your best day, that's not a perfect disclosure, right? Not a perfect uncovering. And then now we're consuming that art, right? Now we're responding to that art. And exactly, as Lewis was suggesting, our own imaginations are the things that are engaged, right? No matter how much you know Tolkien, no matter how many times you don't have Tolkien in your head. You have what is in your head is your own interaction with it. It has been made yours because you have indwelt it, right, with your own imagination. This is one of the reasons I really love discussing adaptation and thinking about adaptations, because it really forces us to confront these things in ways that it kind of puts this out on the table in ways that just get concealed when we're just talking about the books by themselves, right? There's a sense in which we can all feel like we're all just talking about Tolkien here in some kind of objective, pure sense, right? But we're not. We never really are. Like we're talking about, and sometimes this comes out in different ways, talking about, right, ways in which this strikes us, things in the text which really hit home to us in particular ways, which might not hit home to somebody else in exactly the same way. So what does Tolkien mean? Like, what does the story mean? What's important about the story? What is it? What's it about? Can vary, right? Vary from person to person because of these things. And
that's the applicability. Yeah.
All of this is this hugely interesting, fascinating, complex,
is.
Interaction of things. And, at the end of the day, my moral to the story is, therefore, let's all be patient. We can't be quick to dismiss. Think whether you're, whether one is tempted to be dismissive of an adaptation or whether you're tempted to be dismissive of somebody else's response to the text or to the adaptation or whatever it is.
Right.
This is all really, really complicated. And the more we think about this, the more we spend time really thinking about, okay, how am I interacting with this? Right.
That's right.
And then encountering that with other people, the more things get opened up, right? You will discover new things when you begin to explore someone else's imagination of the text, which might be quite different from yours. And at the end of the day, you might be like, no, that's not how it is to me at all. I don't see that. And that's fine. Again, this is why I find the whole situation surrounding adaptations to be so rich and fascinating.
It really is. And it's very tied into what this question was about. How we imagine it to be in our own minds as we read it. Because even though we're reading the text, right, we're going to interact with it individually, all based on what we've taken in throughout our lives, whether it's other adaptations or our own imagination. That's why nobody engages with the text in the exact same way as somebody else.
Right.
And this is a key example of that.
Right.
Wow.
And to remember that even the text itself is not the text itself was Tolkien groping at a thing that's out there,
that's true.
At something else.
He imperfectly, was able to tell us this story that was historical that he discovered, with the frame narrative. But even he was not able to get it perfect, as we know through the writings that we find in the history of Middle Earth. How many times did he change his origin of orc story, or he never was able to quite solve the way that the sun and moon situation was, never got fully resolved.
Yes.
So, that's just the nature of creating, sub-creating, and then adapting. Yeah. Wow. Great question. Absolutely fantastic question, Lewis. I really appreciate that. For now, though, we're going to go ahead and take a quick break and we'll come right back. Now, before we get back to the discussion, we want to make sure you know that when you finish listening to this episode, the talk continues all night long at the Prancing Pony Podcast.
Our delightful listener community keeps the conversation going in all of the Prancing Pony Podcast social media spaces, from our common room on Facebook to our Reddit community, Twitter, and more.
Now, on Facebook, just look for the Prancing Pony Podcast and be sure to follow the page, but also join the group there for some great discussions.
You can find the Prancing Pony Podcast on Reddit at r/PrancingPonyPod or at Prancing Pony Pod on Twitter and Instagram.
That's right. And don't forget to check out my new podcast, The Rings of Power Wrap-Up, where James Tauber, Sarah Brown, and I discuss, analyze, and speculate all about Amazon's television adaptation of J.R.R. Tolkien's Middle-earth.
Oh, man, I love the all-star team you have put together there.
Seriously.
Right?
Talk about hitting a home run on the first at bat.
Oh, yeah. I am so excited to hear that.
It's going to be so much fun.
Alan, with this awesome team. They're going to be taking deep dives into lore behind the show, talking about their favorite themes and characters and much more. So look for the Rings of Power wrap-up and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and follow @Rings Wrap-Up on social media for more.
And folks, if you do enjoy the show, please consider supporting the PPP by joining the Fellowship of the Podcast. When you do, you get a lot. You get an active Discord community that includes live episode recordings. You get episode postscripts, episodes without the digital ads. You get free merchandise and a lot more.
A lot more, actually. Live Discord hangouts, a chance to be part of these Questions After Nightfall episodes, or even join the PPP as a guest in the North Wing. So check out patreon.com/prancingponypod to support the show and become part of the Fellowship of the Podcast.
Now, the support that the PPP gets on Patreon is honestly what enables me to pour so much into the show. So really do please consider that. And you can also help us out, though, by giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Now you can even leave us a rating on Spotify as well. And finally, please recommend us to your friends. And now it's time to head back to the common room for some more questions. Corey, who's up next?
Next is Jerry.
Jerry, welcome.
Good evening. Thank you. So, of the 6 individuals that we are told are granted and then make the choice to live either among the men or the Eldar, so 4 of them were told the reason they make the choices they do. Luthien and Arwen were told because of the love of man.
Right.
For Elwing, because of the choice of Luthien. And then for Eärendil, for the sake of Elwing.
Right.
The only 2 that were not given a reason for the choice they made are Elrond and Elros. So I have a 2-parter.
Okay.
Why do you suppose, or what are we to make of the fact that we're not given a choice for Elrond and Elros, if there is anything to make of it? And then for part 2, what do you suppose their choices were? And why do you suppose they made the choices they did?
All right.
Now the irony is, I've been pondering this for about a month and a half. I've been waiting to ask this question for a month and a half. But about 2 minutes ago, it occurred to me why that might be, and it makes perfect sense. But I'm very interested to hear what you have to say.
All right. Well, we're looking forward to answering this one, Jerry. It is a good question. And I'm sure you're not the first person to wonder why we haven't been given those reasons.
Though the first thing I find myself thinking about is marveling at how little I have wondered about this. It's one of those things like, and this happens to me a lot. People ask a question and I'm like, I never thought about that. And then I'll be like, why the heck have I never thought about that? But yeah, no, this is the way in which Elrond and Elros serve as this kind of frame, right? They're like the frame for the second age, like the transition from the first age to the second age, that, Elrond is going to be, this sort of link of the memory of the elder days. And he's going to carry on through, because we know he's going to still be there. And then Elros is going to go and he's going to be the head of the line of Numenor. I guess like their sort of roles seemed so satisfying to me that their own personal motivations, I've actually rarely thought about that. Is this something you've sort of imagined?
I've wondered, but I've never really put the thought into it to come up with an answer, right? I mean, I thought, well, here's a couple of people who made radically different choices, who would have had to, look at each other and say, we're going to be parted forever as brothers, as twin brothers.
Yes.
And all that they had endured, right? I mean, they were kids when they were essentially, orphaned and then raised by one of the guys who basically was responsible for destroying their home. Yeah. What a traumatic life. And you would almost think that they would like flip a coin and both choose the same thing.
Right. Right. No matter what happens, we're going to stick together, right? I mean, especially as you say, like the idea of them growing up as orphans, practically, right? At least for a time, does really kind of emotionally bring that home of like, don't separate the siblings kind of thing, right? So the fact that they don't think that way does feel significant. So of course, one thing which I should just get out of the way is, as always, we have to always remember there was always a couple different ways to answer questions like this, right? There's the looking within, thinking within the world of Middle Earth, and then there's looking down at looking down at Tolkien's process, right? So kind of from inside and from outside is sort of how I think about that. So like the answer to why they make the choices they do from outside seems pretty clear, right? Yeah. That, Tolkien wants them in those roles. And indeed, like
he wants one to be the first king of the Numenorians and one to be a tie to the elder days. Right.
Exactly. I mean, and clearly, like, what he's actually doing is he's cloning Elrond. Like, I mean, it just started off with just Elrond, right? And there were these two narrative jobs, right, to be done at the beginning of the Second Age, right? One was to be that kind of bridge from the First Age, right? And to, keep alive the memory of the Elder Days in Middle-earth. And that was Elrond's job, like, from the day one of Elrond's character. That was his job, right? But then as the Númenórean story develops, he really wanted Elrond to be the king of Númenor as well. Right. Like, so he wrote the story with Elrond originally, and then he's like, okay, well, he can't be both. So he literally clones him, right? That's right. And gives him a twin.
Oh, man.
So really it is the desire to have that, to have somebody in the Elrond position, that is, the son of Eärendil and Elwing.
Somebody who represents all the various races.
Yes, I mean, especially in the latter half of the Silmarillion, it's like all genealogical roads lead to Elrond, right?
Exactly, yeah. And that's the thing. I mean, we hear Elrond being called the half-elven, but of course he's not exactly half-elven. I don't remember the ratios anymore. He's a part, literally, of everything, right? He ends up representing not only elves and men, but each of the three houses of elves, each of the three houses of the Edain, and a splash of Maya as well.
Right, exactly.
So, he's got this sort of unified thing going on where he brings in all the different peoples. And that's why he wants him in that role.
I was going to say, if only Tolkien had thought of some kind of like dwarf elf romance like that.
No.
That would have been the perfection of the thing, wouldn't it?
I'm just going to throw in random sounds into our soundtrack now because I want to try to drown that out. Sorry. Man, Corey's attempt at saying, please don't make me the permanent co-host. I'll do anything to get out of this job.
I'm just saying it's the only thing missing from... No, of course I'm not.
You're right.
But anyway, but no, you're right. I mean, he's really sort of... he's really the centerpiece there.
He really is. You're right.
Yeah, but anyway, so from outside, it's fairly clear, right, that he really likes the idea that all of that, that all of that history, right, that memory, like even from a genealogical sense, right, it's really carrying in his person all of this, keeping alive all of the stories of the First Age, like in his own person, right, and so to invest both the kind of beginning of elvendom in the Second Age in Middle-earth, and also the line of the Kings of Númenor with that same kind of cultural memory of the history of the First Age makes all kinds of sense. But,
it does.
And again, that's, I think, another reason why I've rarely caught myself asking the question of...
Right, because you know it from the authorial perspective.
Yeah, I do tend to think about it that way first. Yeah,
but that's not a satisfactory answer to most people.
It's not.
They want to know in universe, why would they choose differently? Why would two people who grew through trauma as children choose to separate their fates? I mean, Elros is going to leave the circles of the world, and Elrond is not.
Yeah,
that's a big, big shift, and I don't know if there is a satisfactory answer to that in universe.
No, it's never really alluded to. I mean, you can see, just as you were kind of hinting at, I think, thinking about Arwen, right? And how this sort of memory, which is not very present in the text, like we don't get a whole lot of memories, like reminders, prompts, right? To recall Elros in that moment, in the Return of the King, when Elrond is thinking. It's really kind of something we have to just sort of sit down and do ourselves, is think about, man, holy cow, what Elrond has been through, right?
Seriously.
But yeah, the he is familiar with the loss that he is going to experience with Arwen and Arwen's choice. He is. And he's been through that,
and possibly
before.
The choice of his sons as well, depending on what they choose or what we know that they've chosen. Right,
exactly. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely a big deal. I'm thinking one piece of, I don't know how much it helps, but one relevant piece of data, that is, I don't know how much it really helps us to resolve the question of why did they make the decision. But one other piece of data that we have is Tolkien does mention that Eärendil wanted to go human.
Yeah.
Right? Like his heart said human. He doesn't. But see, it's interesting because, of course, this is exactly what we're talking about, right? We're saying, like, why didn't they work it out, and choose, like, whichever they choose? Like you suggested, flipping a coin or something, right? Why didn't they prioritize being together? Because it's exactly what Eärendil does prioritize, right? He prioritizes, I'm sticking with my wife. She really wants to go elf. I'd rather go human, but, obviously, it's more important for me and Elwing to stick together than it is for me to choose one or the other, right? And Elrond and Elros don't make that choice. Like, they don't prioritize sticking together. So I guess even more than what exactly was it that drew them to one or the other, that mere fact seems to me something that is at least as important, as any of those particular things would be, especially since we have the contrary example right there in Earendil's choice.
Yeah, absolutely. Jerome, you wanted to contribute a little something to this one.
Oh, yeah, I just was wondering if any decision Elros had made had anything to do with, wanting to somehow extend like the life of humans almost, or men in the world. And that somehow kind of is the start of like a quote unquote infection in the bloodline that eventually became Ar-Pharazôn and all that craziness near the end.
So the idea would be that he would be trying to, like a good infection sort of thing. Like he's trying to inject some hardy elf genes into the stock here at the start, kind of deal.
Like most things, starts off with good intentions, but then that intention eventually is where it just came through the bloodline and manifested into whatever went into Ar-Pharazôn's mind.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we know that's, obviously that's going to sort of go downhill, but, that's hard to blame Elros for that. It does seem significant that Elros does achieve the longest lifespan of anybody, right? And obviously, in part, this is just sort of a gift to him. Though the gift of longevity to the Númenóreans has always struck me as, not the Valar's worst choice, but not their best either.
I was going to say, there's a lot of competition for the choice, the worst choice for Valar, but this wasn't exactly a good one because it certainly gave them plenty of time to ponder their mortality in a way that would later backfire. Yes.
In the end, I don't think it helps, but yeah. It's hard to see them. I mean, I guess at the end of the day, if I have to guess, and it's a pure guess,
right?
The only thing from the text that my guess is rooted in are the two facts. One, that he's made the king of the Númenóreans. So what actually the outcome is. And the second is thinking about Earendil's desire to be human and his role. So the one association that I have with both of those things is leadership, basically. The sense that, look, humans are in a wreck, right? I mean,
yes,
they are hurting. I mean, everyone's hurting at the end of the first stage, but, the humanity is just, they're not just in the refugee camp. They're like the hangers-on of the people in the refugee camp, right? I mean, they're in a really, really bad place.
They'd be happy to get into the refugee camp. You're right.
Yes. Earendil's leadership, right? I mean, clearly he was a really great leader. I mean, the fact that he becomes the leader of that settlement by the Bay of Valar shows. I mean, there are lots of other candidates of people who, could have been the leader there. It really shows that he was not only a good leader, but that he really cared about that. So that's what I've always associated from his own kind of career path, right? I've always sort of associated Eärendil with leadership in that way. You could say that his like going off adventuring for long periods of time and leaving everybody behind is not the very best possible leadership. And I understand that. You would not be wrong if you said that. But nevertheless, I've always associated him with leadership in that way and suspected that the reason why Eärendil wanted to be human is that he really wanted to take a hand in helping to bring some order and just like to help improve the lives of the, of the humans that he loved and that he has pity for. So I guess I've kind of projected that association I have with Eärendil upon Elros because I have nothing else to go on. So that's my vague guess.
And the other guess that I would add to this, see, in my mind, I think the decision that Elrond made is the more extraordinary one. There are a couple of reasons for that. One, of course, is the gift of death to men. I think, we know that the elves talk about how at the end of the day, they're going to be the ones jealous of men, that they're going to be the ones who wish that they could leave the circles of the world. I think given the experience that Elrond and Elros had as children with elves,
right,
I would probably choose to be a man. Because I don't wait a minute. I know what elves did, right? I don't want anything to do with that. I'm going to be a man. And in the meantime, that's going to give me the ability to change my fate, change the circumstances of my life outside of the music. And it'll give me the ability to leave the circles of the world. I think it's actually more extraordinary that somebody in that position made the opposite choice, that Elrond is the one who chose to be counted among the elves. And his is the decision that I have to admit I don't get from an in-universe perspective. I only get it from the perspective of Tolkien needing a bridge from the First Age.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I do think that people sort of think, well, obviously, like, immortality is awesome. So
that's pretty cool.
That's the no-brainer choice, right? But, you know, in Tolkien's world, that is just not really, it's not as simple as that.
No, it's not.
And the thing that I think is particularly telling about this is that it's only people who are already in a pretty bad headspace, right, who are really pining for immortality. It's like desiring immortality is a bad sign. Really, like it's a red flag.
Yeah.
And so therefore it is certainly not held out as just something, well, obviously it's a given that immortality is really, really desirable. That is to say, I think that anybody who would say, well, obviously Elrond made the no-brainer choice is really not thinking it through from a Tolkien perspective in that way.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. That's another fun question. We've got some great ones tonight. Corey, what's our next one?
Okay, our next
question... Well, not that you know what our next question is.
I don't know.
I should have asked you not what our next question is, but who is our next question coming from?
Exactly. Our next question will be from Lori.
All right, Lori. Well, welcome. What's your question for us tonight?
Well, so by the time this episode airs, we will have had a couple of episodes in season 7 under our belts, which is so exciting. Book 5, the best book in the trilogy, right? I think everyone agrees. And there are so many changes to our podcast and our podcast family, and this is all very exciting. But we also, in addition to having new co-hosts, we have some new characters and some new voices that we're going to meet in Book 5. And I was just wondering which new voices you're really looking forward to playing around with in this season.
Oh, goodness. You're talking about for voices like the reading voices when you do character voices. Did I tell you that, Corey, that when we get to the readings, you'll actually have to do characterizations?
Oh yes. I'm excited.
Good. Of course, you're only going to be joining me for the first 2 of 5 episodes on Minas Tirith. So I don't know who that means you'll get to do. I'm looking forward to a bunch of them. Denethor's the one that terrifies me the most. I will say that. I really want to work hard on getting him right.
Yes.
I was thinking maybe a William Shatner thing. Gandalf, you would supplant me with the one hand. No, I can't do that.
Sorry, that's just a juxtaposition I'm just going to savor for a little while. Yeah.
I should tell you, Sean and I have often played with some really hilarious ideas. I think some of them have come out every now and then. We joked about the idea of doing Éomer as sort of like a John Wayne cowboy.
Right.
Which would have just been so much fun. We've talked about, I can't even think of some of the things. We have thrown around some hilarious ideas that we could never do.
Yeah.
You know,
well, it's like in my Lord of the Rings online stream through a series of circumstances I can't even remember now. Whenever I read out the quest text for Gléowine the Minstrel, I always do it in the voice of a Western prospector.
That's great.
It started off because he was drunk the first time. And so I was doing drunk, and then I kind of oozed into like Western prospector, and someone made a joke about it. And from then on, I just leaned into it. And like reading the words of the Bard of Rohan in the voice of a Western prospector is pretty funny. So, really sometimes these things work out. Sometimes they don't exactly work out. But
Denethor terrifies me, but I'm looking forward to him. I think one of the most fun voices. Oh, goodness. Well, Ioreth is going to be fun.
Ioreth, for sure. Oh, man.
She's going to be awesome. I mean, that is going to be so much fun. Beargill.
I was going to say that too. Yeah.
That's going to be fun. He's such a neat character. And I think that's going to be just an innocence, but not a full innocence, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
That's going to be fun to play.
I mean, he's we get Beregond, who I love Beregond, but he's, he's this wonderful, like, Gondorian man on the street.
Right. He's an everyman in many ways. Yeah,
exactly. And so Beargill is like him in some ways, right? And yet the similarity, but the difference is that, like, how do you capture the sort of the juvenile perspective of Beargill? Mm-hmm. You certainly couldn't just read him in like a, sort of Oliver Twist piping child voice, right?
No, you can't.
So, but yeah, no, I was actually thinking Beargill too was going to be my primary answer as far as the early chapters are concerned.
Yeah, that's true. Oh man, there are going to be so many fun voices. I'm trying to think of more. We hear from the King of the Dead, don't we? That's going to be fun. This is where some of the times the adaptations fill my brain instead of the books.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't remember if we do or not.
We do get a line or two, right? I think
so.
A line.
It's always fun to do creepy voices. I mean, I think if I had to say my favorite voice in 6.5 seasons, it would still have to be Glaurung.
Yeah.
I absolutely loved doing Glaurung. I just eat that up, man. It was so fun to do evil in such a creepy way. I mean, it's one thing to do Morgoth evil, but Glaurung, man.
Oh yeah. No, I agree. That is just, that is absolutely the top. Some of Glaurung's speech. I mean, we were talking about, Túrin and Nienor earlier on. And I mean, Glaurung's lines in that story, really, really wonderful.
Yeah. I do know that we do actually hear from the dead, right? They get to the Stone of Eric. And I believe we hear the King of the Dead basically asking, who's summoning us.
Yeah, I think it's just the one line, right?
I think so.
Yeah, they don't get the whole conversation or anything, but
no, we do get to fulfill our oath and have peace.
Right. And of course, one of my personal favorites, whose very name is like doing a voice, is Hanbury Han. Right?
Oh,
I mean, man. Hanbury Han. So the GH, right?
Yeah.
The GHs, I should say, in his name, right? Not only does English not have this consonant, English has never even been introduced to this consonant, right? I mean, it's like, there's some consonants that we just don't have, right? Like the
that is one of them.
Which is really fun, but we don't really have that one, right?
No.
So the GH is the voiced version of the consonant. So you've got to make that sound in the back of your, and then you've got to
make it voiced.
You got to voice it. So it's,
oh my goodness, that's going to be hard.
Is that consonant? But you can't just sit on it, right? You got to do it fast. So Hanbury Han, which is almost utterly impossible to say without spitting.
Jordan, I apologize for the plosives.
Exactly.
Have fun editing that one.
This goes way beyond the normal problems one has with consonants and microphones. This is a completely new level, right? Oh,
yeah,
exactly. But
my goodness,
his voice, oh man, that'll be huge fun.
That's going to be an interesting chapter only because, we've talked about race in Tolkien before, and I think we're going to have to really, very clearly address the sort of noble savage trope that Tolkien really falls into with Hanbury, that guy.
Yes.
The one I'm going to try to pronounce later. If anything, that might keep me from doing too much of the voice, only because I don't sort of want to play into that trope.
Well, yeah, you don't want to play like a
Tonto
19th century. Exactly. You don't want to play
Yeah.
Tonto. That's exactly what you don't want to play.
Yeah. So it's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
Boy, that's going to be fun, though. Going to be fun. So many cool voices. You're absolutely right.
But I do think, going back to the one that you're terrified of, I think that Denethor, and here I feel... So there's some things that are done so well in the Peter Jackson adaptations that there's a kind of pressure, how could you sort of live up to that? Yeah. But there are other things in the Peter Jackson adaptations which are done so badly that it's okay, now there's all this pressure to how to, especially with Denethor, right? It's easy to be oh man, they screwed up Denethor, which look, I'm not a huge fan at all of the Denethor in the Peter Jackson movies, but now it comes to the point. Right? Now you've got to do it properly, right? You've got to do justice to him.
Talk about pressure, and that's exactly the thing that I've been thinking of. Is and it's no disrespect to John Noble, because I don't, he was just doing what he was.
He's a wonderful actor.
Yeah, he was just doing what he was directed to do. But you're right, it's not book Denethor by any stretch, and I had to try to convey book Denethor in a way that is respectful of the text and that is uniquely different from the films, because the films really do make him sound like cackling evil old man,
Yes.
And it's going to be a real challenge, but I'm looking forward to it in some ways. I think I'm a little less intimidated by his voice than I was with Saruman, who was the one I was most afraid to do, because his voice is itself a character in a way.
Yes.
In the sense that you've got to get his voice down right. And I had to choose a different path than Christopher Lee, because I'm not Christopher Lee. I can't do that voice. And I ended up just choosing the idea of of just trying to make him very honey-tongued, very musical and very soothing, and somebody you'd really want to listen to for a very long time, which is kind of the opposite of me. So Denethor, I think is going to be a lot of fun, but scary because I've got to get him right, and I've got to get him right pretty much out of the gate.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I agree, Chad and Lori are both talking about how great Book Denethor is, right? He's a great leader, and yeah, absolutely. I've also long thought that the characterization, the depiction of Denethor is there is so much wisdom from Tolkien in that. I mean, I think that just like as far as understanding of like human psychology, like Denethor is such a wonderful, thoughtful, sort of wise case study, right? In what can happen to people who are like the opposite of horrible people, right? The opposite of I mean, he is a remarkably talented, and he's a remarkable person who goes down this path, and we can watch him going down. We only watch the last few steps in a sense, but anyway, what we see from him, what we hear from him, I think that it's really quite striking.
It is.
One of the elements in some ways that I have often found myself really kind of applying, it's one of the cautionary tales that, in some ways has really sort of shaped my life, to think about, don't be like Denethor in this one way or another, don't let that happen to you. But, so anyway, so that just makes it to try to capture the nuance of what he's doing with Denethor. It's so easy, not necessarily just to go in the same direction as the Jackson film, but to go in some kind of sort of extreme characterization or, sort of cartoonish version of it.
It would be easy to go that far. And certainly, doing it vocally, it's easier to do that, right? The subtlety is harder to do.
Yes.
It's much easier to play extremes. And, I think the story of Book Denethor is much more tragic than the story of film Denethor because he is a much better person in the books. And that makes his fall that much more tragic. In the films, when he ends up, killing himself and running off the end of the thing, you go, well, of course he was going to do that. Right. I mean, it's the natural conclusion to his madness, to what you see from the very first time you meet him.
Yes.
That doesn't surprise you. With Book Denethor, maybe doesn't surprise you. That's not the wrong word, but it really disappoints you. You'd hope that he would not get to that level of despair. And it does make the story that much more tragic than the film version. And I'm hoping to be able to do that, some justice.
Yeah. Tragedy, just as you say. I mean, it really is. And that certainly is the element that I think is completely lost in the films, is that sense of tragedy. And I agree, Jerome, I think everybody had that, when Gandalf smacks him around, and what a relief it is, when Gandalf comes and hits him with his staff and shuts him up and then yells encouragement to everybody. But the mere fact that that's like that they've made Denethor into somebody you just want to hit with a stick that's not Denethor.
No, that is not Denethor. That's Alfred from the Hobbit films. It's not Denethor.
Right.
Or at least it not ought to be. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, goodness. Great question, though, Lori. Thank you for that. All right, Corey, these have been really great questions tonight. Who do we have up next?
Okay, next is Elizabeth.
Excellent. Elizabeth, welcome.
Thank you, and good evening from Kansas.
Good evening. Last time I saw you was in New York.
It was, yes. After a very long series of unfortunate events.
Yes.
Trying to get there. But it was a fun time. It was great.
It was absolutely worth spending the night in Cleveland and sleeping for 3 hours beforehand. Yes. What's your question tonight?
So my question is text-based, comes from the chapter Many Partings in Return of the King.
Okay.
And it's where Celeborn remarks to Aragorn as they're all parting ways, where he says, "Kinsman, farewell. May your doom be other than mine, and your treasure remain with you to the end." Has it ever been noted what he's remarking about? Was there a text that was edited out at some point, or did he and Galadriel already have a serious discussion about future plans?
That's a good question, Elizabeth.
About her future plans that don't seem to involve him? Yeah.
Is she really more affectionate towards Gimli than we originally thought? I don't know.
Oh, come now. Here I was getting in trouble for elf-dwarf relationships earlier on, and mine was much better than that.
I kid. I actually think when he says, and your treasure remain with you to the end, I think he's talking about his daughter. I think he's talking about Celebrian.
It is. I mean, I think that's a really interesting perspective because he, when Celeborn is making cryptic statements, one is tempted to like.
One is very tempted.
Galadriel's always like the elephant in the room when Celeborn is talking, right? I mean, like you're always, it's always easy to kind of associate it back to Galadriel, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily like right. he doesn't necessarily always.
It's always Galadriel, but it's not always Galadriel. Yeah,
exactly. It really doesn't have to be. I do feel this is one of those things I've never really fully understood. I mean, I've thought about it, and there's like a bunch of questions that I have. This is one of the things that's so much fun about Tolkien. Because
yes,
like he doesn't understand. Like this happens so many times when Tolkien will write something and then he'll just be like, I wonder what that means. And then instead of like some authors would do like, well, okay, that's pretty cryptic and I don't even understand it. So maybe I'll take that out. Not Tolkien, right? He's just like, well, that's what he said. So maybe, we always have to think about it and figure it out. I don't even know. Right. And so, I mean, there are like whole stories that have emerged out of Tolkien trying to understand what one of his characters said.
That is absolutely true.
So this totally strikes me as one of those moments where Celeborn opens his mouth and Tolkien's like, I don't know. I mean,
I don't know. I mean, because even as you say that, I'm like, well, this actually could be a very pointed dig at Aragorn because he might be talking about his granddaughter,
right?
Arwen.
Right. Oh yeah. May your treasure, unlike me, who gets to go without my granddaughter. Yeah, exactly. Right. Did I mention? Thank you for that, sir. Yes, exactly.
I mean, I doubt it's that. That seems really harsh, but it is an interesting concept. But you're right. You can spend a very long time trying to figure out what in the world Celeborn really means.
Yeah, I mean, that his fate should be other than mine. Like, what is it about his life that Celeborn is unsatisfied with? Or like, what does he reflect back on without satisfaction? I don't know. I think that is the part of it. The business about his treasure remaining with him, I think that we can see whoever it is, right? And it may not even be a specific person.
Could be a kingdom. He's about to leave his kingdom, isn't he? Right? I mean, I'm no longer going to be king of this realm because we're not even going to have a realm.
Right. Or even the whole, like, as you say, there's his daughter, right? But more than that, like the life of elves in Middle-earth is about, loss, especially when you get to the end of the Third Age. He has lost, whether they've sailed to the west or whether they've died, he's lost most of the people he's ever known, much less most of his family.
They fought the long defeat and now it's over.
Exactly. And when you're standing at the end of the long defeat, like that's not a fun place to be. So in one vague sense, it could just be like, let your life not be marked by this same, let his not be a long defeat. Right.
Right.
Maybe let
it be quick and painless.
Quick and painless defeat. Right. Exactly. That would be a better fate than mine. Yeah. I'm sure that's probably what he's wishing him. But no, I mean, so there are lots of ways in which you could see him saying that I wish that your fate would be different without, him having to have like a specific grievance in mind, that he's, sort of like, point. Yeah.
Well, that's why I don't think it's really Arwen. That would be deeply pointed.
Right. Exactly.
He's just called kinsman. So, but I think my initial reading had been Celebrian, that, he's lost his daughter. Hopefully Aragorn and Arwen, when they have children, their children will remain with him to the end.
Yeah.
We see that pain, that parental pain with a few characters, right? I mean, I'm thinking in human characters, of course, I'm thinking about Theoden and the loss of Theodred, or Denethor, who we were just talking about, and the loss of Boromir. And I think that's something that we, as humans, as just ordinary people, can identify with, even if we haven't had the deep, incredible, unimaginable pain of losing a child. And in this case, Celeborn has. And maybe that's what he's wishing, that Aragorn doesn't have to go through that. I don't know.
Yeah, and even if we think about it in terms of his relationship with his realm, that is thinking about not in just terms of his personal relationships, but what he's done, what he's accomplished and that kind of thing. There could be a lot there too. I know it's easy to make the association, right, when he talks about your fate being other than mine, to be with the departure of Galadriel, the imminent departure of Galadriel, right? But,
Yes.
the thing that I come back to there is, whose choice is that? Yeah,
Right.
Okay, she's going into the West. He could go with what is
You
what was
could
he,
go too.
disinvited?
There's room in the
Right?
boat, man.
Yeah, exactly. Right, they have other boats. So, whatever.
Maybe Gil-galad hasn't given him permission.
Yeah, exactly. I was just thinking this. As soon as I said that, I was thinking exactly the same thing.
Set me up with that softball right there, man. Right over the plate.
Exactly. It's okay. He didn't earn it yet. But the point
Gil-galad,
is,
call from Manway on line 1. Manway for you on line 1, King. Anyway,
exactly. But anyway, no, yeah. So he stays for a reason, right? He stays for a reason. And what is that reason? Like, why does he stay? What is it in his work in Middle-earth that's unfinished? And so is there something, is that linked in some sense to some kind of dissatisfaction or some kind of, does he feel that he has not yet achieved his end or something? And is that his problem? Like, when he's wishing something better for Aragorn, is it like, may this all work out for you better than it's, may you have like a sense of fulfillment and job satisfaction in your career that I haven't had? I don't know, exactly what it is.
He has not yet passed the test, and
he's
will not get to go into the West and remain.
Not sure what his test is, but anyway, so again, there's so many things that it could be, and again, this is one of the things. I don't think. Well,
you're right. It could be any number of things.
Yeah,
that makes it really hard to understand, doesn't it? Yeah. Wow. Well, thanks for an unanswerable question, Elizabeth. I appreciate it.
Definitely appreciate it.
It's a good question, though, and I'm going to get to that, not this season, but next. So I'll have plenty of time to think that through. And no matter who's going to be co-hosting with me at that point, I'm going to throw them that question.
There you go.
So I don't have to answer it. Oh, goodness. That's tough. I like that. All right, Corey, I know we've got time for a couple more. Who do we have up next?
We do. Yes. Our next question is from Scott.
Oh, welcome, Scott.
All right, gentlemen, good evening, and thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to seeing both of you next month in Milwaukee. Very excited for that. And I when I found out I could actually be on this evening, I was really thrilled, but I was also going, okay, now I have to come up with a couple questions, because generally if I have a question, I dive in and do my own research, and if I can't answer it, then I just text Chad.
Don't we all? That's exactly.
I was going to say, Chad is the unspoken answer man. Yeah,
exactly. And I was torn. I've got what I thought were two decent ones, but I'm going to have to go with this one because of Elizabeth's question. So I'm going to tag on because this one has bothered me. I'm a 58-year-old grandfather. I have 3 grandchildren who I adore.
Wow.
And this has just popped in my head within the last year. And this question follows on, I think, very well. It is, why on earth did Elrond say, you know what? I got to go. Arwen, can't stay around to see your kids. Can't get to know my grandkids. I haven't had any grandkids, but I'm leaving. Elrond, you couldn't stick around for 25 more years, 30, 50. As long as you've been around now, 6,000 some odd years, you don't have the time to get to know your own grandchildren, pass on a little bit of that wisdom that you have accrued for all these years. And so it's boggled my mind that he and Galadriel had to go. Now, Galadriel did, granted, get to know her grandchildren, perhaps not her great-grandchildren, obviously, but how he had to get up and go is beyond me. And now I see the answer with Celeborn. Celeborn wanted to stay and see his grandkids, great-grandkids.
Well, that's an interesting perspective on Celeborn. Yeah. Well, that's a good question. It's also rather disturbing to me at 54 that you've managed to be a grandfather of 3 and that my oldest child is 10. So clearly I've done something wrong in my life. But that aside, let's go ahead and dive into that question.
I have a suspicion here. In the text, they talk about the ring bearers going together, right? They talk about the rings passing away into the West. And I think it has to be rooted in that. I don't think they really have a choice. They've got to go. Let's remember that the Elvish rings, no, they're not tainted by Sauron's hand, sure, but they're not a good idea.
No, they never were a good idea. They
were never a good idea. And they, meaning Elrond and Galadriel, have been using them, and Gandalf, right? They've been using the Elvish rings. The time has passed, right? Like and now who exactly decrees that? Like, is there, how soon because it doesn't happen immediately. They don't Sauron's defeated and they, take a long weekend and then go straight to the Havens. There's like a year and a half to 2 years, there's a little bit of time. Why that not 25 years, as you say, why not 50 years? But clearly the answer is, in some sense, again, it's okay. I say clearly the answer is as if it's actually an answer, but clearly the situation is that the rings, it's time for the rings to go. The rings go at the end of the Third Age. They're going to be taken out of the world. And Frodo has been a ring bearer and that has scarred him and he needs healing. But Elrond and Galadriel and Gandalf have been ring bearers and that hasn't necessarily done them any favors either.
No, I think you're absolutely right with that, especially Elrond and Galadriel. I mean, I think Gandalf is an exception to some extent, possibly because of his Maiar nature, but also because he used his ring in a very different way.
Yes.
Elrond and Galadriel both used their rings to kind of preserve and to keep in stasis. And Tolkien has often criticized the elves for that decision, right? I mean, that's one of the things he's talked about as their weakness is this irrational love for the way things used to be and how we want to keep it that way. And I think that probably wore a greater burden on Elrond and Galadriel than it would have on Gandalf in terms of how he used it. And same with Círdan, because Círdan gave it to Gandalf when Gandalf arrived in Third Age 1000. So even Círdan wouldn't have had it that long. And there's no indication that he used it extensively because he
we don't have any. Yeah.
He was, under Gil-galad. So yeah, I don't know that he would have been impacted. But of course, he was going to be leaving pretty soon anyway, right? His job is to stay until the last boat. So
right.
I think the rings definitely are the driving factor in the reason why Elrond and Galadriel had to leave so quickly. And that does touch on the Celeborn question just a moment ago, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, certainly as to why, again, it explains why he didn't have to go, but it doesn't explain why he didn't go. Yeah. Yeah, as you said, probably room on the boat. But anyway, no, it's fine. Yeah, and so, I mean, I would emphasize the correlation with the Rings of Power is explicit. Exactly what that suggests about the causality is speculation, right?
Absolutely.
I do find the sort of parallel with Frodo to be a very compelling one myself. That Frodo is affected. He's altered and he has to go. I think there are ways in which even Elrond and Galadriel need healing in a sense. But even beside that, like the time for that is done. Like it's not ring time anymore.
No.
There's a sense in that way in which the use of the elven rings during the Third Age was sort of tolerated, but we're, the West is pulling the plug on that, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
There's definitely, there's now been a firm recall order on that. So
you must bring your rings back to Valinor at your earliest convenience. By that, we mean now.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I think that makes certainly the most sense. And like you said, the correlation is clear, but the causation is not. So we can't really point to, the ring stopped being functional and therefore they started to fade, or we can't say that.
Right.
With any certainty.
They talk several times about how the destruction of the One Ring is going to affect the three rings.
Yes.
Right? But that's not necessarily, that doesn't by itself explain why they would have to leave.
No, it does explain any change to their realms or any changes to the things that their rings, had impacted, but it doesn't explain why they have to leave. You're right.
Right. But I think the fading as well, like whether or not they themselves, that is Elrond and Galadriel themselves, were affected by the ring. And by affected by the ring, I mean like Bilbo was, whether the exactly if their, butter and bread ratio has been tampered with in any way.
Exactly. If they'd been stretched thin in any way. Right.
Yeah. I doubt it.
I doubt it too, because I think that's key with the mortality thing. I think that's really tied into that. Yeah.
But at the end of the day, like they're reaching the end of their time. I mean, so I come back to the stuff about elvish aging, everybody's favorite stuff with, with all of the tables and math.
Nature of Middle Earth from Carl Hofstadter. Yeah.
Yeah. And the thing that was so interesting to me about that, I know Chad is speaking in all caps about this. I know how much of a fan Chad was about this. This is Chad's favorite
tables,
thing ever.
Spreadsheets.
Yeah. I know. Exactly.
I'm all for it, man. I'm all in.
Yeah. But anyway, point is that one of the things that fascinated me most about this is that whenever Tolkien was checking his work, right? So he would make up these scenarios like ratios for the elvish aging and all the different systems, right? He was trying to devise a system that would fit and that would work with the stories. And so the case study he always used was Galadriel, right? He'd come back to Galadriel and Arwen and Aragorn when, trying to fold in the Númenórean aging ratios and stuff. But he'd come back to Arwen and to Galadriel and say, does it work with them? Like, where does it fit? And so what this shows us is it shows us that he had a clear conception for where Galadriel should be at the end of the Third Age. And that's why he was using her as a way to check his math. Right? Because he wanted to make sure that the math ended up telling the story that he wanted to tell about Galadriel. And the story he wanted to tell clearly was that at the end of the Third Age, and he repeated this several times, she should be near the end, not aged, right? She shouldn't be elderly, but she should be like approaching retirement, basically.
That's fair. Yeah. A very late retirement.
Yes, a very late retirement. But again, and not in the terms of like, physical decrepitude or something like that. But that's the point of her life, that she should be like, that's clearly how he pictured her, like how he felt it was important for her to be in the story, is at that point when it's time for her to go. And that if she's going to not go, so that Galadriel staying on, again, ignoring the Ring of Power dynamic for a second, if Galadriel were to stay on, it would be almost like, a Númenórean king not surrendering to death.
That's exactly what I'm thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, not the same thing, but I'm drawing a parallel there. So anyway, there's part of that as well. So, is there any sense in which Elrond and Galadriel are, like, maybe they would have gone sooner if it hadn't been for the Three Rings? Certainly the fact that, like, their responsibility to be the guardians of the Three Rings was certainly had to have been a factor in. I mean, I don't think either one of them were just going to give the rings to somebody else and leave
the ring on the dresser and walk out.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And just walk out. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so I think it was fit for them to go. And I know this is hard when we think about this, as Scott was suggesting, kind of when we kind of root it in these kind of personal things, like, wouldn't they have wanted to stay? Or, and that's very, very natural. But at the same time, like, that's also a kind of rationale that could be used for trying to indefinitely extend your life as a mortal.
Exactly.
And it's not necessarily.
I want to see my grandkids. Then when does it become, I want to see my great-grandkids and my great-great-grandkids?
Exactly.
And Farazan wants to see his, 8 generations down, right? He wants to say, why can't I be immortal?
Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, it's at some point, it's time. Right. They have to go. Oh, yeah. So Elizabeth was asking as a sort of follow-up, if the elves never went to Valinor, it's one thing to go back, right? Like Galadriel's going back, right? Would they still be called there at the end of the Third Age? Did the Morroquendi, right? The elves of the darkness who never went over to Valinor in the first place, are they being called to go over?
Is there another summons, basically?
Yeah, for sure. They are.
Everybody out of the pool.
Definitely an all aboard order that's going on there at the end of the Third Age. And we see this guy, Legolas feels it. Right? Oh, yeah. Legolas feels it, and he's never been to Valinor, nor any of his line, right? So
no, absolutely.
So yeah, we definitely can see that kind of the depth of that calling.
Yes.
With Legolas, of course, it's beautifully illustrated in
the sea longing that he has with the gulls.
That gets just sort of awakened within him, and presumably, and we know the rest of the Galathrim are eventually going to go, right? It's going to be empty.
The place is empty. That's right. And not that far down the road either, because when Arwen, after Aragorn passes away, Arwen goes to Carain Amroth to lay herself down, and the place is empty at that point.
Yep, exactly.
And that's only, what is it, another 80 years, 100 years?
A couple centuries, but it's merely a couple centuries later.
Which for elves is a drop in the bucket, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, yeah. Absolutely. Another good question.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that streak's about to be broken because the last question of the night goes to Chad.
All right, Chad.
I'm kidding. What do you got for us, sir?
Okay. So, hello, I'm Chad, in case you guys didn't know.
Of course you are.
Oh, hi. Good to meet you, Chad.
Nice to talk to you. Sir. Nice to talk to you the first time ever.
Exactly.
So since meteors are back on everyone's minds this week.
All right.
And word recently got out that I was going to be talking to both the Prancing Pony podcast and the Tolkien Professor simultaneously tonight.
This is a rare opportunity, I suppose.
I was asked both of your thoughts about the meteor which El used to make the Galvorn iron for use in weapons such as Anglakel. Mm-hmm. And do you each believe that it was just a regular meteor from space or the void, or do you believe that its arrival could have been in any way influenced by one of the immortals? And if not, at the very least, how much they knew about it?
That is a fascinating question.
It really is. I think I've always imagined that meteor to be a natural phenomenon, right? I mean, meteors happen in the primary world. They do contain often not different elements, but different structures of the elements, right? I mean, the elements are still the elements. It's not like, oh, wow, well, there's this new thing. But they are different, right? Meteoric iron is different than the iron that we can come up with here on Earth. And I think that's just a way for Tolkien to use in story to give us the reason why this weapon is so unique and so rare, and why it has a distinct physical appearance as well. But I'm open to being wrong. I sort of love being proven wrong on things like this, to find out there's a real in-universe reason.
Right. So, my response, I think, is going to be substantially more unsatisfactory than yours, and
which is already not very satisfactory. Yeah.
It's because this is something that I think a lot of Tolkien readers find jarring or find difficult to wrap their heads around, and that is Tolkien. Everybody thinks of Tolkien as this like phenomenal world builder, and like when you ask most Tolkien fans, like, what are some of the things that made Tolkien special as a writer, as a storyteller? People will say things like, oh, he imagined his world in so much detail. Middle-earth is real in all of these ways. And they're not wrong. I'm not like going to disagree with any of that. But the thing that I'm referring to that I think a lot of people have a hard time wrapping their heads around is it was not always the case. Like, that was not the kind of story that he wrote for most of his career. Mm-hmm. He kind of came pretty late to the whole meticulous world building idea.
True.
The early Silmarillion is not envisioned like that at all. He's writing mythology. There is no pressure, almost no pressure, for the kind of internal consistency with reality that we see in his later works, right? This is exactly why the man ended up writing all of these tables and doing all of this long division in the 60s, when he was trying to work all this out. Because what he's doing is trying to apply the kind of rigorous world building that he got into when writing The Lord of the Rings, and really enjoyed and found that he had a lot of fun doing that, right? And decided he wanted to redo the Silmarillion from the ground up on that same kind of level, with that same kind of internal consistency. But it's foreign. It's foreign to the early Silmarillion. It's foreign to the Hobbit. Fair. The Hobbit doesn't work that way either.
No, not at all. You're right about that.
Therefore, it's not true to say that, like, well, if he described a meteorite, right, then that means it must have an explanation. Like, there must be a Middle-earth primary, like an internal world explanation for how, not because that invention came at a time when he wasn't doing that kind of consistency. And now he did later on think about it, right? But of course, the difficult thing is that by the time he would have gotten around to asking that question, I don't know that he ever did get around to asking that question, because of course he didn't get all that far in doing his total world building Silmarillion version. I think he would have come around to answer that question. But by the time he would have gotten around to answering that question, he had already decided the world was round from the beginning.
Yeah.
And so meteorite would have been, it just would have been like any meteorite that we experience. Right. How do you explain a meteorite from the point of view of the flat world with the, as he described it, not just that it's flat, right, but with the whole, with the outer seas and everything, and all the, the different realms and ways that he described it. Where would a meteorite be coming from exactly? Why are there rocks and metal floating around in that space? How could you even envision that without its having this kind of mythic significance? Like, how would a rock fall like that if it wasn't chucked by one of the Valar, essentially, right? I mean, like,
I was like, here, you need some ore. Let me throw you this rock.
Yeah. Now, again, he never talks about it like that. There's never any hint that like this meteorite was a gift from Aule. But I mean, if I were like, basically there seem to be two options, right? If you're going to really make it at home, if you're going to make a big deal of it, which the narrative does not make a big deal of the meteorite. No. It's not like it's an event, right? We just learn that that he made it out of this unique metal, and where the metal came from, the circumstances under which he found it. None of that's really explained. No. It's hard to make a story out of what he never made a story out of at all.
I don't know. Amazon's doing a decent job of it so far.
Yeah, you can do it, and that's exactly why. Well, it's what I find so much fun in that whole project. Mm-hmm. To take a crack at that and see how it goes. But anyhow, so this, I mean, Chad, as you were alluding to the meteor from the Rings of Power series. Or the meteorite, I guess, or is it a meteorite? Did it ever even leave the Earth? Is it just a projectile, right? Lobbed
there you
up
go.
And
is it just a
down?
Ballistic rock? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, one of the things that that really invites me to ask, and Chad, it's connected, of course, with the magic portal curtain of light, right, that we see on the path to Valinor and in the boat scene with Galadriel. Should I have mentioned spoilers about episode 1 and 2 if you haven't seen it yet? But anyway,
I think anybody who's listening to this on September 25th has hopefully watched.
Hopefully, and if you don't, you have nobody to blame but yourself, presumably. So anyway,
fair.
Point is, one of the questions is that it raises in my head is, okay, wait. Is the world that is within the narrative of the Rings of Power show, is that world flat or round? I don't really know.
I've been thinking the same exact question.
Their description of the sailing from west to east sounded like a flat Earth situation.
It did. Mm-hmm.
But the going back to Valinor looks like the straight path. It looks like the lost road.
I know, which it shouldn't yet.
It shouldn't yet. Yeah. Did it change? Was the world made round at the end of the first age? And we just haven't gotten the exposition to explain that? I don't know.
Oh, goodness.
Right?
Yeah.
But the meteor thing also makes me wonder, like, if this dude has come from Valinor and he's coming in by meteor, well, that would make sense if Valinor has taken, it makes a little bit less, I mean, the whole idea that they would be like, well, let's, boats, come on, boats take a long time. So let's put them on the express train and just lob them as a ballistic missile into Middle Earth. Seems weirder to me.
Valar Airlines now departing from Gate 7.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sorry, sir. You're going to have to leave your checked bag and your carry-on and your clothes.
Exactly. Yep. But yeah, so I'm not really sure about that. But it is, I mean, it's been one of my biggest questions that I've been wondering is, are they envisioning the world as flat or round? Because really, again, Chad, when it comes to the meteorite question, that to me is the biggest thing, right? If it's a round world, meteorites, no problem, right? I mean, that's simple. But it's if the world is flat that things get interesting, as it would have been, of course, with Eol's meteorite.
And that's the thing. I don't think I actually had considered that, but you're absolutely right. At that point, with the world being flat, the appearance of a meteorite does really raise some unique questions, unanswerable questions that Tolkien never got to, as you said. So interesting. But I think the thing you pointed out that I'm going to hang my hat on is the fact that Tolkien didn't make the landing of the meteorite in the great destruction of the first age year, whatever, when the meteorite struck and destroyed, this village. Okay, if he turns it into a historical event, then we have some significance. As it is now, there's a rock that fell from the sky. There was some metal in it. Eol's made a couple swords. I mean, it really has that little significance. It just becomes a unique ore.
Yeah, and the more I think about it, the lack of mythic significance feels like stranger and stranger.
It does. A sense, right? I mean, as you mentioned that, I was like, well, that's kind of weird. Because that's a pretty significant event, really.
Yeah, this thing falls from the sky, and it contains this like special ore which enables you to make particularly powerful weapons. Like, in what culture would that not be read mythically, right? I mean, like, you have to actively resist the mythic implications.
Eol must be the only one who saw this thing land, really, and that's why it's not in the mythology because Eowl didn't live long enough to write anything in the mythology.
Right, or nobody read what he wrote.
Well, right, because he is kind of a creep, right?
Yeah, I'm sure he did write voluminously, but nobody just ever wanted
anything
to read it.
He writes is simply going to be referred to as a manifesto, right? Because he's just a little bit of a kook.
Yeah, I imagine him writing like some of those like really disturbing, creepy diaries, right?
Oh, without a doubt.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dear diary, I saw a pretty lady in my woods today. I'm going to get her.
And it goes downhill from there.
That's the nice entry, right?
Exactly.
I'm going to weave a web. I'll convince her to like me. I really will. I'm a likable guy. Right, diary? Yeah, creepy stuff, man.
Yep.
Eowl.
That's exactly how I'm picturing Eowl's diary. Yeah.
Not that his son is any better, but anyway.
No, but I think Myglin's diary would have been more interesting reading. It would have been like you would have felt dirty afterwards, but it wouldn't have made you
especially
creep out all the way.
The pages near the end after he met his cousin.
Oh yeah. Like you would have started getting more and more uncomfortable until then you have this sudden realization.
Awkward stuff.
Oh my goodness! Like this guy has been a creep all along, right? Yeah.
Seriously, man. Well, I should say I'm not totally surprised that after one round of questions, we've gone almost 2 hours.
That's not normal.
I pay.
That's not, okay.
I love it. No, I absolutely love it because we've had such a good time exploring what turned out to be some really, really great questions that gave us a chance to dive deep into them. No complaints at all. I'm absolutely thrilled. Tonight was a lot of fun. But folks, it does wrap it up for another episode of the Prancing Pony podcast. But please join us again next week when Corey and I open up book 5 of The Lord of the Rings and bring you up to speed on the events so far.
And folks, we want to take a moment to thank the team that helps make this show better. Our research assistants, along with our Barlaman, Becca Davis, editor Jordan Rennells, social media manager Casey Hilsey, event and Patreon community coordinator Katie McKenna, and website guru Phil Dean.
And speaking of the website, please be sure to give us a visit there at theprancingponypodcast.com. We've got show notes, hilarious outtakes, Prancing Pony ponderings, and of course our online storefront where you can get all sorts of PPP merch.
And definitely check out the library page. You know we love the books of the Prancing Pony podcast, and we provided links for you to get nearly every book we mention on the show. Now, we do get a few pennies from the purchases you make there, so thank you.
And we also want to thank some more really important people, our patrons at the Kierdans contribution tier. I'm going to start with DeMay in Alaska, James in Virginia, Tamsin in Minnesota, Chad in Texas, Lance in New Jersey, Paul in Colorado, Jerry in Texas, Mario in Utah, B in California, Joseph in Texas, Kathy from North Carolina, Lori from Washington, Carlos in California, Brian in the UK, and Ned from Connecticut.
We also want to thank Jerry from Washington, Joe in Washington, Erwin from the Netherlands, Dylan in Australia, Ben in Minnesota, Anthony in Texas, Karen in the UK, Zaksu in Illinois, Jim in Maryland, Brian in Texas, Sarah in New Jersey, June in Ireland, Brad in Massachusetts, and Joshua in Massachusetts. Thank you all so very much for your support. And please be sure you don't miss any episodes of the Prancing Pony podcast. Subscribe to the show through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app.
And one last thing as always, folks, don't forget to send your thoughts, comments, and most of all, your clarifications, refutations, and argumentations about any of our answers tonight, even if that would make you wrong, to Barlaman at theprancingponypodcast.com. And if you want a chance to have your actual voice heard, well, you can send us audio of you asking your question by visiting podinbox.com/prancingponypod and record your question for us.
Just make sure to still send the question to Barlaman, okay? Now, Barlaman's a lot more reliable lately, but we do get a lot of mail, so we'll get to you as soon as we can, and your question or comment may be featured on a future episode.
As always, though, this has been far too short a time to spend among such excellent and admirable listeners. But until next time.
Farewell, friends.